Alrighty, folks, we have a lot to get to today, including some more leaked chats of the DC shooter. What is his left-wing philosophy? What was driving all that? King Charles is making land acknowledgments in Canada now. The left is out of its damn mind. Plus, President Trump's big plans to actually keep the House in 2026. And what's going on in the stock markets? Tons going on. Right now, all Daily Wire Plus annual memberships are 40% off, including all access memberships. This means ad-free daily shows from the most trusted voices in conservative media, access to our full library of original films, documentaries, and series, early access to offers and announcements before anyone else, members-only content you're not going to find anywhere else. Now is the time to join and save 40%. Go to dailywireplus.com. Use code DW40 right now. Folks, there is a philosophy that has now become dominant on the left and even parts of the center. It's throughout the West. And this philosophy appears to be really, really funny at first blush because it's just kind of silly and ridiculous. And then it turns out that the deeper roots of this philosophy, well, they bear a deadly fruit. So we begin today with a bizarre and hilarious spectacle. King Charles was visiting the Canadian Parliament, and he decided that it would be worthwhile to offer a land acknowledgement. I'm just going to point out at this point how hilarious this is. King Charles is the King of Great Britain. The only reason the Canadian Parliament exists is because of Great Britain's intervention in Canada, because of the settlement of Canada by British citizens. That would be the reason he is there in the first place. Him doing a land acknowledgement and taking that seriously would amount to essentially disestablishing Canada, the United States, Australia, South Africa, and a bunch of other countries. Because it turns out that all of those countries were originally created as sort of functioning polities by the British Empire. This bizarre idea that he can arrive on Canadian territory and start apologizing to the indigenous for the presence of white people in this particular area is absurd, especially coming from King Charles, who is the greatest beneficiary on planet Earth of the imperialism of the British Empire. And the reason I bring this up is because, once again, there is this philosophy that is afoot on the left and in parts of the center, which says that a human universal, which is migration, settlement, annexation, conflict, that is a human universal. It is not unique to white people. It is not unique to Westerners. It is not unique to Europeans. It's just that white people, Westerners, and Europeans have been much better at it than other parts of the population on planet Earth. They're more successful, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries at it. Okay, but that does not mean that there is some unique sin that attends to whiteness, being Western, being European, or anything remotely like it. And having King Charles read off this land acknowledgement is so ridiculous and absurd just on his face. Here we go.
I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. This land acknowledgement is a recognition of shared history as a nation, while continuing to deepen my own understanding. It is my great hope that in each of your communities and collectively as a country, a path is found toward truth and reconciliation in both word and deed.
Okay, well, I mean, theoretically, since you are the head of the British Crown, you could cede a bunch of territory back to the quote-unquote unceded territory of the Algonquins. You could do that, but you're not going to do that because the whole thing is ridiculous on its face. Of course, it's unceded because the nature of human conflict is that when people migrate from one part of the earth to another part of the earth, conflict tends to arise, and then someone wins and someone loses. And it is a very good thing that the British Empire won in Canada. Not in the War of 1812. It should be part of America. It should be the 51st state. But if it's not going to be part of America, the basic idea, which is that the world is better off because of the British Empire, the world is better off because of, for example, American power, the spread of European ideals, that is obviously true. The spread of things like property rights, due process of law, capitalism, freedom of religion, these things which are not a human universal. Now, that is the legacy of the West overall. There's always an attempt to take human universals and then project them as West-specific problems. And that is not true. And the problems of murder and rapine and looting and slavery, these are human universals. The thing that is unique about the West is all the other stuff. And reversing that polarity, reversing that, and suggesting that the West is somehow uniquely sinful because it was better at war than other places, or because Westerners were better at settlement than the Algonquins who lived on the land where Canada's parliament now sits. that somehow it's a human tragedy. It is not, in fact, a human tragedy. Bad things happen throughout human history. The bad things are a tragedy. But overall, in the broad scope of history, is it a very good thing that Europeans ended up on the North American continent? It's an absolutely wonderful thing that Europeans ended up on the North American continent. Anyone who doesn't believe so should probably leave. Truthfully, if you don't believe that, you probably should go and you should cede your apartment right now, your dingy apartment in Brooklyn. You should cede it back to the natives from whom your ancestors took it, if that is your idea. But again, it's ridiculous and silly, but it ties into a deeper and more deadly philosophy. And you can see that philosophy springing up in a few different places. So the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, visited the United States recently, visited the White House, and he was asked about the kill the Boer chant. So in South Africa, among groups like the EFF, it has become common at rallies to sing a song called Kill the Boer, which is about the Afrikaners, farmers who originally settled in the area of South Africa as early as the 17th century, have been there for hundreds of years, and obviously were responsible at one point for tremendous racism against black people. That, of course, is true in South Africa. But the solution to that is not genocidal chants. But the idea is that so long as the people who are shouting the genocidal chants are not white, European, and Western, then it suddenly becomes good. It suddenly becomes okay. Here's Cyril Ramaphosa trying to make that case.
And we take into account what the Constitutional Court also decided when it said that, that slogan, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, is a liberation chant and slogan. And it's not meant to be a message that elicits or calls upon anyone to go and be killed.
You see, it's a liberation chant. Okay, so the rule for the left is apparently that if you talk about crime statistics in minority neighborhoods, that is a form of genocidal racism. If, however, you literally shout, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, that is not in any way a genocidal chant with genocidal intent. It's a liberation chant. Why? Because the rules don't equally apply. In this left-wing philosophy, where the sins of the West are unique, and good is the universal human attribute, but the West is unique in its evil, what that means is that the West has to be destroyed. And again, this goes back to a sort of Frantz Fanon philosophy. Frantz Fanon was an Algerian rebel who wrote a very famous book called The Wretched of the Earth, in which he essentially suggested that colonized people had every right to, quote unquote, kill the colonizers, and that they could do whatever they wanted in retaliation. It didn't matter what they set up next. It didn't matter what regime they then implemented. The important thing was the West was uniquely sinful, and the West therefore had to be destroyed from without and within. And this sort of stuff has deadly consequences. And it doesn't matter whether you call this stuff anti-white or anti-Semitic or anti-whatever. The problem with this generalized philosophy is that it is just evil. It is an evil philosophy. When you separate the world into victims and victimizers, and what you suggest is that anyone successful, anyone who's been uniquely successful is a victimizer, and anyone who is not is a victim. And because those people are victims, they therefore have the moral impetus and the moral weight to go out and kill people. What you end up with is actual terrorism, actual violence, actual overthrow of the institutions that make the West great in the first place. I bring this up in the context today of the shooter of the two Jews in Washington, D.C. last week. So Ken Klippenstein, who's a left-wing journalist, actually, he's gotten access to this shooter's leaked chats. And he's surprised to find that the shooter isn't explicitly anti-Jew. Okay, but that's been my point for a very long time, is the anti-Semitism of the left, the anti-Jewishness of the left, is not really about Jews. It really is more about the idea that any group that is disproportionately successful anywhere on earth is a victimizer and therefore must be laid low. And that is what you see from the philosophy of the shooter. The philosophy of the shooter, which is that the West is uniquely bad, America is uniquely bad, white people are uniquely bad, Jews presumably are uniquely bad. That is not unique to Jews. That is true of a broad, overarching, left-wing, oppressor-oppressed matrix. And that has deadly consequences. So the point that Klippenstein, because he's of the left, is making is that this guy isn't explicitly anti-Semitic, meaning he doesn't say, I want to kill Jews. He says he wants to kill Israelis, which apparently is much better. Right? He's just anti-Zionist, not anti-Semitic. Okay, well, what difference does it make when the Jews are the ones who die? And also, when the broader philosophy is not really even about Israel or about Zionism, it really is just about hatred of the West. According to Klippenstein, a woman who knew the shooter said that he was unequivocally not anti-Semitic. Everything I know about the shooter leads me to believe he acted in protest of the Israeli state and Zionist ideology, not Judaism. He never ever said anything remotely racist about Jews or anyone, not even in a joking way. This is according to a friend of the shooter. So, number one, who cares? He shot 2 Jews. He shot them because he perceived them to be pro-Israel. That is why he shot them. Why exactly does it matter if the hatred in his heart was derived from an ethnic hatred of Jews or whether it was derived from a much more dangerous, bizarrely perverse philosophy about, again, how the successful in the world are evil and everyone else is a victim of those people and therefore murder is justified? We'll be getting to more on this in just one moment. First, free online services like Google actually charge you by using your personal data. They track your behavior. They sell this information to advertisers. When something is free, you're not the customer. You're actually the product being sold. Your digital self is traded to unknown entities who might want to sell you products or influence your political views. To reclaim your privacy and protect yourself online, you should use ExpressVPN. Without a VPN, your internet provider can legally track and sell your browsing data in the United States. Meanwhile, data brokers collect your information across websites and apps, creating detailed profiles of you through your IP address. ExpressVPN solves this by routing all your activity through encrypted servers, preventing your ISP from seeing or selling your data while also hiding your IP address so brokers can't actually track you. I use ExpressVPN all the time. Been traveling an awful lot lately when I'm in airports. I'm using public Wi-Fi. Hackers should not know what I'm doing online. That's my business. It's incredibly simple to use. Just one tap for protection. It works on all your devices with a single subscription covering up to 8 devices. You don't need technical expertise to use it. The tech reviewers at CNET and The Verge do rate it as the #1 VPN worldwide. I partnered with ExpressVPN because I want all my viewers to have access to this important privacy protection, which is why right now you can get an extra 4 months free when you go to expressvpn.com/Ben. That's expressvpn.com/Ben to get an extra 4 months totally free. Also, if you're a homeowner, you need to listen to this. Did you know that somebody can literally steal your house? I don't mean like they jack it up on a truck or something, but the value in your home actually can be stolen. A scammer can forge your signature on one document, use a fake notary stamp, and spend about $40 to file it at the county recorder. Then they can take out loans using your home as collateral. You won't even know it's happening until you start getting collection and foreclosure notices in the mail. Can you imagine if you or someone you cared about became a victim of these scams? That would be incredibly sad and frustrating, especially knowing there are people out there like Home Title Lock who can help keep an eye on your title. Most people never check on their home title once escrow closes. That's why it's critical to find out right now if you're already a victim by going to HomeTitleLock.com. They'll give you a free title history report and provide you with $1 million triple lock protection to help keep your home and equity safe. That's why I recommend and am proud to partner with Home Title Lock. Many people at the Daily Wire, including people on this team, trust Home Title Lock to protect what's likely one of their biggest assets. Again, protecting the value in your home is probably your biggest asset. You need to protect it. Get 24/7 monitoring of your title, urgent alerts if there are any changes, and if fraud does happen, their U.S.-based restoration team will spend up to $1 million to fix the fraud and restore your title. When you go to HomeTitleLock.com and use promo code Shapiro right now, you can get a free 14-day trial and a title history report and find out if you're already a victim. That's HomeTitleLock.com, promo code Shapiro. So, for example, the chats to which Klippenstein was made privy, those chats go back a decade. And what the chats actually show, again, there's a person who has a rainbow in his profile, not exactly a shock. And he hated, it appears, the Republican and Democratic parties, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, the right and the left, the bourgeois, the United States, the West, and of course, Israel. His hatred of Israel was made evident on October 7th. So this was not about a quote unquote genocide. As I suggested this last week. Why does the left like the genocide law with regard to Israel? They like it because it gives some sort of imprimatur of legitimacy to their true hatred, which is just of Israel existing in the first place. On October 7th, this shooter was posting, quote, just saw an incredibly gory video of the aftermath of Israeli troops trying to get dressed for the ambush, absolutely massacred by Hamas fighters, LMAO. Not just that, this person openly talked about hating America. He called Israel the little Satan, which of course suggests that America is the great Satan, which is language that is the language of Hezbollah, the language of Iran as well. When it came to President Trump, obviously he hated President Trump as well. He hated America. He routinely tweeted about America and put it in his group chats. There's a broader philosophy at work here. It's the same philosophy that leads to the ridiculous. The ridiculous iteration is King Charles, the King of Great Britain, sitting there and denouncing European presence on the North American continent, which is insane. That's the ridiculous iteration. But the deeper iteration of that is a murderous philosophy that, again, says the West is uniquely evil, Europe is uniquely evil, white people are uniquely evil, Jews are uniquely evil, Israelis are uniquely evil, and all of the rest. And that has real consequences in the world. And so we can laugh, and we should laugh, at King Charles being forced to say the words, but recognize that university-led philosophy, the kind of philosophy President Trump is trying to fight at Harvard, by the way, that university-led philosophy has real consequences. There's an interview with one of the people who was present at the DC shooting. And this interview was about the person's experience. This person happened to have been a graduate of Columbia University. And the person said, I totally recognized what kind of person this was because I've seen that exact same hatred in the eyes of fellow students at Columbia University. That is not a shock. It's a thoroughgoing left-wing philosophy that is being promoted by our nation's top universities. That is the real underlying reason why President Trump right now is going after Harvard University, by the way. So the Trump administration is now seeking to fully end Harvard's federal contracts. According to the Wall Street Journal, the General Services Administration has called for a review of federal contracts in a letter viewed by the Wall Street Journal saying that Harvard engaged in anti-Semitism as well as race discrimination in its admissions processes. That is perfectly legitimate. They do not have to send grant money to Harvard. If Harvard violates the Civil Rights Act, then they are not owed the money. The Trump team is also weighing requiring all foreign students applying to study in the United States to undergo social media vetting, which we should. If you're entering the United States on a student visa, you shouldn't come here and hate the West and hate America. You shouldn't. I mean, first of all, the universities of the United States should not be subsidized by taxpayer dollars to teach kids to hate America. That is a bad thing. We shouldn't be subsidizing the philosophy of NPR. Hilariously, NPR and 3 Colorado public radio stations are now filing suit against the Trump White House over the president's executive order that bars congressionally appropriated funds for NPR and PBS, which of course is, again, totally appropriate because why should American taxpayers be subsidizing the far left insanity of NPR and PBS? And the self-righteousness of a media that has repeated all of the insane nostrums of the left on these issues. People like Scott Pelley over at CBS News. These are ridiculous people. Understand that there is, in fact, a wall-like tsunami of left-wing agitprop that comes from our media, from our universities, and it bleeds down into people like the DC shooter and bleeds up to the monarch of Great Britain. That is a deeply evil philosophy and wrong philosophy covered up for by the self-righteousness of schmucks like Scott Pelley of CBS News. Scott Pelley, who I'm name-checking right now because he did a much-celebrated commencement speech at Wake Forest University, where he talked about how wonderful he is. He said, "We discuss, not destroy. Journalism is under attack. Universities are under attack. Freedom of speech is under attack. An insidious fear is reaching through our schools, our businesses, our homes, into our private thoughts." And then he compared himself to Abraham Lincoln and such. Now, these are the people who have propagated this nasty philosophy in the name of journalism and then celebrated themselves. Here's Scott Pelley enjoying the crowd's applause for this sort of garbage.
To move forward, we debate, not demonize. I like this crowd.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he does. Of course he does. Because they're all part of the same think group. My favorite thing about the Scott Pelley speech at Wake Forest University is him citing Orwell to the effect that it is newspeak to get rid of buzzwords like diversity, equity, and inclusion. No, the newspeak was diversity, equity, and inclusion, which just meant racial preferences. DEI was just a soft form of what Cyril Ramaphosa was saying, which is that if you are the right race and you can't kill the Boer, it's totally fine. And there he was cheering it. You want to know why it is that President Trump has picked up ground in nearly every metro of the United States, with the exception of some of the highly college-educated metros? This would be the reason, because President Trump rejects this philosophy. One of the amazing things about the Trump administration is that if you look at the polls right now, the Trump administration's policies on a wide variety of topics aside from immigration, not wildly popular. But it doesn't matter because the Democratic Party is running at 27% in the opinion polls. And the reason for that is because they cannot divide themselves from this radical left philosophy that has deadly consequences. And meanwhile, President Trump is trying to come up with a plan so that he can maintain the House of Representatives. That, of course, is an uphill battle. Off-year elections are always rough for the party in power. The Republican hold on the House is incredibly narrow right now. And President Trump knows effectively that the minute Democrats take over Congress, then his administration is done, because it will just be investigations up the wazoo. There will be lawsuits. The pen and the phone probably won't suffice at that point. He won't have a Congress to work with. Impeachment will almost certainly be on the table in the House of Representatives literally day one. So President Trump has laid out a 5-step plan to retain Republican control of the House. The GOP right now has an 8-seat majority. That includes vacancies created this year by the death of 3 Democrats. But, those are Democrat seats. So really, it's like a 5-seat majority. And there are some retirements that have already taken place. So it's going to be a rough ride in 2026 for Republicans if history is any guide. So what exactly is the Republican Party trying to do? According to Axios, the White House is targeting several Republicans in politically divided swing districts and urging them not to ditch their seats or run for higher office. So President Trump, for example, is trying to get New York Representative Mike Lawler, who is one of the holdups in the House Big Beautiful bill because he wanted SALT deductions. Trump wants him to stay in Congress rather than running for governor because he's afraid that that seat will then turn to a Democrat. They're also hoping that some of these incumbents retain their seats rather than running for governor. So, for example, Michigan Representative John James is running for governor in Michigan. President Trump is apparently worried about the GOP's chances of keeping that seat. They're also worried about the central Kentucky seat held by Representative Andy Barr. Meanwhile, President Trump is going to unleash giant gobs of money in these House races. Apparently, according to Axios, he's built a $500 million plus political apparatus. There are already commercials airing in 13 districts where Trump won in November, but the House GOP candidates lost. President Trump is also going to oppose a lot of primary challenges because the idea is that burns up a lot of money and divides the population in those districts. And what you really want is a clear run to the congressional seat. They're going to raise a lot more money, presumably. And they're going to ramp up recruiting in some of these swing districts. So that is the actual path to try and retain a House majority at this point. In order to retain that House majority, however, the next couple of years have to go pretty swimmingly for President Trump. And herein lies one of the problems with President Trump's tariff war. We'll get to more on that in just a second. But first, I bet you know the Cars for Kids jingle. In fact, I would be kind of shocked if you didn't. Listen. Okay, so I got to tell you something. Cars for Kids is not just a catchy jingle. This amazing organization will come to you free of charge at your convenience and tow away any old vehicle you've got sitting around and turn it into charity funds for kids. They take care of all the paperwork and logistics, and you walk away with a tax-deductible receipt for the sale price of the car, a vacation voucher, and space in your driveway for that new vehicle. Don't wait. Call 1-877-CARS-4KIDS or go to carsforkids.org/Ben. That's cars with a K and the number 4 to donate right now. It takes just a couple of minutes to give them your information. They take care of it from there. They've done this over 1 million times. They can help you as well. That's carsforkids.org/Ben. Remember, that's cars with a K, carsforkids.org/Ben. Also, choosing Simply Safe for this studio, one of my easiest decisions. When we arm the system before we leave or call it a day, my team and I get instant peace of mind knowing our equipment and creative work are protected. With Simply Safe Standing Guard, I can focus on my work and rest easier, confident that I'm covered if anything happens, especially while I'm out of the office and traveling. I want you to experience that same security in your home. With Simply Safe, families enjoy the gold standard in home security and genuine peace of mind whenever they arm their system. Unlike traditional systems that only respond after a break-in occurs, Simply Safe's Active Guard outdoor protection works to prevent intrusions before they happen. Their AI-powered cameras with live professional monitoring detect suspicious activity, allowing agents to intervene in real time, speaking to potential intruders, activating spotlights, contacting police before anyone enters your home. With no long-term contracts, affordable monitoring at about $1 daily, and a 60-day money-back guarantee, Simply Safe delivers both protection and value for homeowners. Again, it is the best way to keep your studio, your home, any place that you want to keep safe. Visit simplysafe.com/Shapiro. Claim 50% off a new system with a professional monitoring plan. Get your first month for free. That's simplysafe.com/Shapiro. There's no safe like Simply Safe. So right now, President Trump's tariff war, it is taking a toll on the economy. I understand that right now, if you look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average or the S&P 500, it's bouncing up and down like a yo-yo. I totally get it. The economy has not plummeted. Consumer confidence remains pretty strong. There's still a lot of money awash in the economy thanks to the inflation of the last several years. But Americans are still somewhat disquieted about the path forward here. There is, in fact, a toll on the economy because uncertainty is its own form of risk when it comes to investment. So, for example, right now, as I say, people seem pretty sanguine about the Dow Jones Industrial Average or the S&P 500 because if you look at the numbers, the S&P 500 for the year is off maybe 2% from where President Trump was when he took office. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is off, I think, 3.8% from January 21st, 2025, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so people are like, well, he's doing all this tariff stuff. It's reshifting manufacturing, which we will see if it's actually doing that or not. I'm doubtful that tremendous amounts of manufacturing are going to reshore because of the tariffs that he's placing right now. But okay, let's assume that some of that is happening. That's fine. Okay, but if the idea is that the markets have only sunk 2% or 4%, depending on the market, based on President Trump's tariff vacillation and inconsistency, that's actually looking at the wrong stat. If you actually want to look at what this sort of vacillation and inconsistency costs the markets, what you should be looking at is what would have happened if Trump didn't do any of this stuff. So the real question here should be, what should the markets have been right now versus what are they right now? Not what were they in January versus what are they right now, which again, minor shortfall, but what should they have been and what is the delta to where they are right now? So I asked my friends and sponsors over at Perplexity this question, assuming the same rate of growth as the period November 5th, 2024, that is the day before Election Day, to January 21st, 2025, that of course is Inauguration Day. What should the Dow Jones Industrial Average and S&P 500 be today? And what is the percentage difference between where they are today and what they should have been? And the answer is that using daily growth rates during that period and projecting values, basically the Dow Jones Industrial Average, according to Perplexity, should be at close to 48,000. It is currently around 42,000. The S&P 500 should be at about 6,100. It is currently, or was a couple of days ago, around 5,800. So the shortfall in the Dow Jones Industrial Average is well above 10%. The shortfall in the S&P 500 is around 4%, but theoretically could be larger depending on how you do this projection. Investors are desperate for President Trump to actually be consistent. They want the consistency. They want some level of understanding of where the policy is going to be tomorrow. Beyond that, the fact that President Trump did all of this tariff action under the auspices of a law that probably doesn't actually carry the weight, right? It's all done under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That's very likely to be overthrown by the courts. Let's be real about this. It's very difficult to understand what is the national emergency invoked by the President of the United States on trade that would justify the gigantic tariff regime that he has put in place, this 10% blanket tariff plus 30% on China. What exactly allows the president to unilaterally set tariffs this way? That should be the purview of Congress. All this stuff should have to be going through Congress. And by the way, one of the beauties of having to go through Congress is actually less inconsistency. When you have an executive branch that can willy-nilly do what it wants, you end up with wildly vacillating policy. When you have a legislature you have to deal with, the checks and balances create a level of gridlock, which leads to consistency in policy, as opposed to this sort of wild vacillation in the markets. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because if you want Trump to succeed, if you want Republicans to retain the House, the economy cannot dump between now and November 2026. It cannot. And if all this vacillation leads people to sort of wander around in the marketplace, not know where to put their money, put it in speculative properties, put it in bizarre crypto schemes, if that's what people end up doing because they don't know where to put their money, and then some sort of exogenous shock happens to the economy, or one of the many bubbles in the American economy bursts. And there, by the way, there are a bunch of bubbles. There's a crypto bubble right now. There's an AI bubble right now. There's a real estate bubble right now. Those are all bubbles. And we are replete with bubbles in the American economy thanks to the inflationary policy of the Federal Reserve over the course of the last several years. Too much money, not enough places to put it, and uncertainty about where exactly to put it. And uncertainty about where to put it even in terms of bonds. This is why the bond yields are way, way up. Because, again, people aren't even rushing to safe haven in bonds. People literally don't know where to put their money at this point. If the economy should downturn, you got a problem. The Trump administration, again, used the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to actually impose those tariffs. But the reality is that it's difficult to explain why the executive branch should be able to simply declare a national emergency on the basis of a trade imbalance. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, He made the case in a filing on Friday that a ruling that narrows the IEEPA would have ripple effects across every domain in which economic instruments are used for strategic effect. The difference is, of course, that the IEEPA was designed for emergency situations. So he says, for example, we couldn't have used economic measures to help calm everybody down over India and Pakistan. But actually we could have, because that's an actual national emergency. That was an incipient conflict between two nuclear powers. That is not the same thing as Madagascar sells us too much coffee. Right? That is not a national emergency. Madagascar sells us too much coffee, or Ethiopia sells us too much coffee. So it'll be interesting to see where exactly the Supreme Court comes down on that one. But again, that sort of inconsistency, the sort of taco trade element of this, the Trump always chickens out trade element of this, is not good for the economy generally. What's also not good for the economy generally is a feeling of a bubble. That feeling is created by appearances of corruption, by appearances of insider baseball. There have been a spate of stories, we've been covering them over the past several weeks because they are worthy of note, in which people who are close to President Trump, members of his family, his children for the Trump Organization, or for World Liberty Financial, have been going around and essentially picking up sacks of cash for a variety of business deals all over the world, particularly in the crypto space. And again, the crypto space, because it is largely unregulated at this point, and because the Trump team is trying to be pro-crypto, which I think is good. I am very pro-crypto. I own crypto. I own some Bitcoin. I own some Ethereum. I'm an investor in a crypto firm, right? Like, I'm very pro-crypto. But if you wish for crypto to actually become a solid part of the financial framework, then what you can't have is the appearance of people selling snake oil out there on the basis of fame and fortune. You can't do that, especially if those people are connected to the Trump administration who's drawing all the regulations. That is a problem, because if there is an economic downturn, I promise you, if there's an economic downturn, Democrats are going to run successfully on the proposition that a bunch of people got rich who are close to the Trump family and that everybody else got stuck holding the bag. This is why the economy can't collapse under President Trump. It's also why the Trump family should stop openly engaging or engaging at all in many of the sort of activities in which they are currently engaged. And I mean that ranging from social clubs in Washington, D.C., designed to essentially provide access to members of the administration to crypto events in Qatar. Right, today, according to the New York Times, Trump Media and Technology Group, that is the parent company of Truth Social, said it would raise $2.5 billion from institutional investors to invest in Bitcoin. So they're moving away from their social media play originally, and they're moving into a financial services and crypto play. Now, Trump Media's largest shareholder is President Trump. They're going to raise $1.5 billion from about 50 institutional investors by selling 58 million shares. They're going to raise an additional $1 billion from the sale of bonds that can also be converted into shares at a later date. That's going to dilute the value of the Trump Media stock right now, but it is also going to radically increase the holdings of the company, of course. And by buying Bitcoin while the Trump administration is simultaneously attempting to set up a national treasury in Bitcoin, increasing the price, because again, higher demand means higher price when the supply remains stable, which it is in Bitcoin. That's the whole purpose of Bitcoin. When you do that, what you are doing looks a little skeezy. Again, all this sort of skeeziness we talked about with the Qatar jet, this sort of skeeziness is likely to have really bad political effects. Right now, again, if everybody is sort of fat and happy, none of it matters. But if the economy downturns, the sort of oligarchy play that AOC and Bernie Sanders are making is going to sound a lot more plausible. And if Democrats take Congress in November 2026, thanks to some sort of economic downturn, I promise you, all the people who are pro-crypto are going to get it right in the teeth, because Democrats are going to see the entire crypto industry as working closely with the Trump administration. They will see it as an enemy and they will attack it with alacrity. The appearance of impropriety can have the exact same effect as impropriety, even if nothing is technically being done wrong. And I don't know whether something is technically being done wrong here. I don't. And I'm not a legal analyst when it comes to SEC filings. What I will say is that World Liberty Financial, which is the large crypto instrument that is co-run by the Witkoff boys and the Trump boys and some of the other members of Team Trump, World Liberty Financial is currently selling tokens, like millions and millions, like tens of millions of dollars of tokens. Those tokens are not resellable. So you are effectively buying, quote, a voting right in World Liberty Financial's decentralized finance policy. I don't even know what that means. Maybe it means something, but I'm not sure why you would expend perfectly good money for a token that is not resellable and has no inherent value, so you can vote on the direction of a company in which you do not have even remotely a majority because World Liberty Financial is 75% owned by the Trump organization, from my understanding. Right? That sort of stuff, does that look great? Is that the sort of stuff that is going to redound to the benefit, non-financial benefit, political benefit of President Trump's agenda? I'm putting these warnings out there because if those warnings are not out there, then if the thing happens, people are going to get taken by surprise. But they shouldn't be taken by surprise because Democrats are already planning this playbook. You wonder why all these pieces are coming out. Number one, because these things are in fact happening. It is not just relegated to left-wing coverage in the New York Times. There's coverage in Tablet. There's coverage in the Free Press. Because everybody is looking at this. People who know the financial industry and know crypto, they're looking at this and they're going, this does not look totally right here. Is it likely that the American people are going to like this sort of stuff? Are they going to, is that going to be good? Again, all I care about here is Republicans retaining the House, because if Democrats take the House, the presidency's over. All I care about here is the policy that President Trump has promised the American people he will implement. That's the stuff I want. Anything that gets in the way of that stuff is stuff I don't want. And this is why vacillation on trade policy. This is why the appearance of impropriety among members of the Trump team. And again, here I'm going with Trump team in sort of its broadest iteration, including members of the Witkoff family, members of the Trump family, people who are surrounding the Trump family, the 1789 Capitals and the Omid Maliks and the rest of these cast of characters who are obviously doing very, very well while President Trump is president. You know, that sort of stuff, it's going to come home to roost. And again, I'm not making allegations of criminal activity here. I'm just making an allegation that when you do stuff that appears dirty to the American public, whether or not it actually is, it is very unlikely that political gravity will not at some point apply. And it would behoove the Trump administration to recognize that. And it would behoove the Trump administration to be above reproach on this sort of stuff if they wish a proper agenda to get done. Because the blowback, if things go wrong here, is going to be absolutely exorbitant. We'll get to more on that in a moment. First, I need to make sure that I'm maintaining my health, hitting the gym, spending time with the family, even with the busy work schedule. When I was younger, I used to think I could just power through on willpower and caffeine. I learned pretty quickly peak performance requires peak nutrition, and that means actually eating vegetables. But I don't like vegetables, so I'm very thankful to have balance of nature, which fits right into even the busiest of days. Imagine trying to eat 31 different fruits and veggies every day, which sounds miserable, time-consuming. With Balance of Nature fruits and veggies, there's never been a more convenient dietary supplement to ensure you get a wide variety of fruits and veggies daily. Balance of Nature takes fruits and veggies, they freeze-dry them, they turn them into a powder, and then they put them into a capsule. You take your fruit and veggie capsules every day, and then your body knows precisely what to do with them. It's kosher, so I can pop it right into the protein smoothie, and I'm good to go. Head on over to balanceofnature.com, use promo code Shapiro for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer, plus get that free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro. Go check them out right now. Balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro for 35% off your very first order as a preferred customer and get a free bottle of fiber and spice. You can actually decide that President Trump is not going to carry forward, for example, his tariff threats, and it'll probably be okay. Where this becomes a much bigger problem is when it comes to foreign policy. Obviously, America's enemies are taking up the same mantle. They clearly are. So, Russia right now is pushing incredibly hard in Ukraine. Russia obviously believes that it has the momentum with it. Russia believes that President Trump is going to eventually back off a harsh stance against it. That's what they believe. How do we know that? Because they're openly saying it. So President Trump put out a truth in which he suggested that really bad things may happen to Russia if they continue along these lines. Quote, what Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. And I mean really bad. He's playing with fire. Okay, that's fine. But it seems that the Putin team, that they are basically assuming that Trump is going to back off of this. How do I know this? Because Russia Today, which is an official outlet of the Russian government, put out a tweet saying, quote, Putin doesn't realize he's playing with fire. Trump's message leaves little room for misinterpretation until he posts the opposite tomorrow morning. I mean, the question is, are they wrong? Okay, first of all, they're insulting and ridiculous, but are they wrong would be the key question here. And the answer is, I don't know. You don't know. No one knows. So right now, President Trump is apparently weighing some sanctions of his own. According to the Wall Street Journal, President Trump is eyeing sanctions against Moscow this week as he grows frustrated by Vladimir Putin's continued attacks on Ukraine. The restrictions likely wouldn't include new banking sanctions, one of the people said, but other options are under discussion to pressure the Russian leader into concessions at the negotiating table. Trump is tiring of peace negotiations and is considering abandoning them altogether if a final push does not work. But what does that mean in terms of further commitment to Ukraine? I mean, if he backs off and then says we're not backing Ukraine, that's exactly what Russia wants. That's literally what they've wanted the entire time. So are those sanctions going to happen? And this, again, is an area where it would be great to have the Senate. You remember there's this whole vestigial organ of government called the legislature. It'd be awesome to have them sign into chat at this point. So just as with trade, where it'd be great to have Congress sign into chat and, take back its traditional prerogative on what the trade rules should be here in the United States, it would be great to have Congress sign into chat on new sanctions. Like, does Congress have anything to say about sanctions? They should. Is a point the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal is making. Mr. Trump may be the only person in the world still surprised by how Mr. Putin is behaving. Mr. Trump and his advisors fancy themselves steely-eyed realists on foreign policy, no neocon idealism for them. But on Mr. Putin, they're starry-eyed idealists, mouthing peace as if they can make it happen by wishing it were so. The good news is the United States Senate still has some genuine realists when it comes to Russia. As GOP Senator Lindsey Graham writes in a letter nearby, he has 82 co-sponsors on a bill that would hit countries that buy Russian oil and gas with tariff sanctions. If Mr. Trump signaled he supports the Graham, Tom Cotton, Richard Blumenthal sanctions bill, it would sail through the Senate. I have a question. Why shouldn't it sail through the Senate anyway? If you have 82 co-sponsors, they should just do it. Why doesn't Congress take back its traditional foreign policy prerogative here? That is the thing that actually should happen, because if you wish to remove the sort of static in the line with regard to Russian policy, it would be great to have the Senate sign in. By the way, the Senate should sign in with regard to, for example, an Iran deal as well. So a kind of shocking story from Axios yesterday emerged that suggested that President Trump had cautioned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a phone call last week not to take any action that could jeopardize negotiations between the United States and Iran on a new nuclear deal. Okay, so first of all, I have a question. Israel is not involved in those negotiations. So why should Israel hold off? Real question. Israel is the country most under threat from Iran, not the United States. Okay, so if we were going to take the full-scale J.D. Vance isolationist realist position, shouldn't the United States just sort of wash its hands and walk away and say whatever happens, happens? But I notice that's not what's happening. Instead, these so-called restrainers inside the administration, they're not attempting to restrain the United States, which is already restrained. I promise you, my 100% certitude is that President Trump is not going to authorize a bombing raid on the Iranian nuclear facilities. Whether or not we should, I don't think it's going to happen. Okay, that's just the reality. So why is the restrainer team inside the Trump administration trying to stop Israel from doing that thing? Why? With what bad deal? Iran keeps saying openly they will not stop enrichment. If they were truly afraid of what President Trump is going to do to them, then they would be coming to the table making concessions. Instead, they appear to believe that President Trump and Steve Witkoff and team are more desperate for an Iran deal than Iran is, which is insane. There is no reason the United States should be more desperate for a deal with a completely weakened Iran than Iran is for a deal to open up its economy. Iran should be coming on bended knee right now. All of their proxies have been exploded by the Israeli military. Their economy doesn't exist. Right now, the Iranian rial is trading at historic lows. The rial amounts to 0.000024 of a US dollar. Okay, which is to say that one US dollar is trading for 42,125 Iranian rials, which, shall we say, is not a particularly good record there. That is because their economy's been crushed. And yet, the United States is so desperate for a deal, what, for the sake of a deal? The Iranians know this, which is why they're pushing. And so when Trump warns Netanyahu not to go and do anything about Iran, just trust us. Okay, listen, I will trust that President Trump will cut a good deal if he continues to maintain the Trump 1.0 stance, which is no nuclear enrichment at all, no nuclear facilities at all. That was something that 3 weeks ago the Trump administration was saying. President Trump himself, again, I'm with Trump 1.0 on this, not Steve Witkoff and J.D. Vance 2.0. Donald Trump 1.0 killed Qasem Soleimani, destroyed the Iranian economy, and held them in check. Then Joe Biden came in, reversed a bunch of that stuff, and you got October 7th and a vast regional war. Why wouldn't we just go back to Trump 1.0? That is the foreign policy that actually shaped the Abraham Accords. Why is that not the thing? Instead of calling the prime minister of Israel and telling him he needs to restrain himself on Iran, if you actually wanted to negotiate this thing out, shouldn't the Trump administration be going to the Iranians and saying, listen, we can't hold these guys back? Or if you actually want to negotiate a good Iran nuclear deal, what you would do is you would say to the Iranians, these Israelis, they're champing at the bit. They're ready to hit you. You need to, let's make a deal. Let's make a deal because otherwise, I don't know, like what I can do. They're an independent country. Like what? But the reason I would assume that there is such lack of comfort from the Israeli government toward the U.S. government right now is because of all the signals that are coming out from the U.S. government, ranging from maybe we'll give them like a pause in nuclear enrichment, and then later they can enrich. Or maybe they can enrich to 3%, but not 60%. Or maybe we can basically do the Obama JCPOA 2.0 and ram it through. And meanwhile, by the way, the NSC, the National Security Council, is apparently being cleansed of many of the more hawkish members, deliberately. According to the Daily Scroll, which is a daily newsletter over at Tablet, the NSC, which again, there are lots of reasons that you want to cleanse the NSC. There are a lot of bad people who have been over at the NSC. The most obvious example being Alexander Vindman, who led off the first impeachment of President Trump by leaking documents from the NSC, calls between President Trump and Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine. But many of the people who are being fired right now are people who were hired about 5 minutes ago. Tablet says, shortly after Dan Caldwell, a Koch world restrainer, was fired from the DOD. Meirav Sarin was targeted in a messaging op, falsely claiming she was a member of the Israeli Defense Ministry. The story, which was sourced to restrainers in and around the administration, was published by the far-left outlet Dropsite News and amplified on social media by the Qataris, the Council on American-Islamic Relations, the National Iranian-American Council, and organs of the Koch network, including the Quincy Institute, co-helmed by NIAC founder and Iranian asset Trita Parsi. Now, again, the goal here apparently is to sort of cleanse the NSC of people who are not the quote-unquote restrainers, meaning the people who are more isolationist in their foreign policy orientation. So you wonder why the Russians are feeling their oats right now, why they believe that Trump isn't going to stick by his guns, or why the Chinese are ramping up activities around Taiwan, or why the Iranians are pushing harder in the negotiations now. Again, the Iranians should be back-footed. They have no defenses in their skies. Their proxies are gone. They no longer even have a route to Lebanon because Syria has been cut off from them. Why aren't they coming on bended knee? The answer is because they see daylight and they see weakness. And as Park McDougald reports, Caldwell's allies see J.D. Vance as their protector. They ran to Vance rather than to the president with their concerns. Vance's office appears to be taking a leading role in purging the NSC of its Iran hawks, i.e. the people who would oppose a bad nuclear deal with Iran and also have the knowledge and experience to tell a bad deal from a good one. And some of the suggestions from Tablet suggest that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, in an attempt to sort of maintain good relations with the Vance wing, has now aligned himself with Vance and Witkoff. Now again, maybe this all ends well. Maybe it all ends fine. Maybe President Trump sticks by his guns. But certainly that's not the way the Iranians are reading it right now. The Iranians are strengthening their demands. That should be an indicator as to where they see the power right now in the Trump administration. And that is not particularly good for the United States or our allies. The pressure right now should be on Iran. It should not be on a democratic ally that is attempting to get rid of the Iranian nuclear weapons. Again, the agenda that Trump himself laid out during his first term and in his run for his second term. America's opponents should be afraid. They should not be dunking on the president the way that Russia today just did. Speaking of which, there is a new aid system that has now been unleashed in the Gaza Strip, a humanitarian aid system. It was ripped by everybody on the left. It's not going through the UN. It's not going through the UNRW. Right. It is going through sources that are not going to simply hand the aid to Hamas. You can see, it's kind of fascinating to watch the coverage of this new aid system. Basically, some Hamas people showed up and tried to shoot people in an attempt to disturb the aid system. Hamas was literally warning Gazans, don't get food from the American aid system that's being set up right there, because Hamas wants to control the distribution of aid. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is running it. There are now 2 separate sites that have been set up, distributing food to hundreds of thousands of people. According to the Wall Street Journal, the distribution of aid began normally on Tuesday, with Palestinians lining up to receive boxes of food early in the day at a distribution center in Rafah in southern Gaza. Around 4:30 p.m. local time, a poorly constructed gate collapsed as large crowds tried to push through the narrow entrance. Looting ensued. They said they heard shots fired in an effort to disperse the crowds. Apparently, some of the people who were doing that might have been connected with Hamas, or it could have just been too much demand for the aid, and then they fixed it. Okay, but here's some actual video of the Gazans thanking the United States for not letting Hamas distribute the aid. This is from Cassie Akiva at Daily Wire.
Thank you, America.
Literally shouting, "Thank you, America." It is kind of hilarious that the United Nations is ripping into this system, despite the fact that the UN itself was used as essentially a proxy vehicle by Hamas for literally decades. UNRWA employees were involved in October 7th. UN sites were used as the launching base for rockets and missiles. So once again, leave it to the media to completely miscover the situation. They've done a wonderful job of that. Okay, meanwhile, in ridiculous entertainment news, the latest in the Diddy trial, it's Diddy update. So, again, the big question in the Sean Puffy Combs Diddy McFace trial is whether he engaged in trafficking or whether he's just a generalized piece of crap. Right? That's the real question here. The defense admits that he's a generalized piece of crap. The question is whether he is also a trafficker violating federal law. According to the Washington Post, the third week of testimony in the Diddy trafficking and racketeering case brings more prosecution witnesses to the stand, including Combs' former assistant, Capricorn Clark. Capricorn Clark. Okay, it's a name. That's better than Taurus Clark or something. In testimony last week, Scott Kid Cudi Miscudi alleged that Clark called him to say that her boss had broken into Miscudi's home. Other former assistants have testified saying they procured drugs and other supplies for Combs and witnessed his physical abuse of his former longtime girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. Ventura alleges she was coerced by Combs and his associates into participating in the alleged freak-offs. Again, he is pleading not guilty, and they are suggesting that these two had a volatile relationship and that he was, in fact, abusive, but that's not the same thing as trafficking. Capricorn Clark described her tumultuous life working on and off for Diddy, a job she still misses intensely. Apparently, after his homes were raided by federal agents, she tried to get a job with him anyway. Clark told the jury her job was to keep Combs and his operation professional, but she then described a profoundly unethical web of operations at Bad Boy Records and other Combs companies. Clark testified she saw Combs viciously kick Ventura in 2011 as a punishment for her secret side relationship with Kid Cudi. Also, apparently, the last question to Capricorn Clark from the defense attorney was about a comment she made in an April 2024 meeting at which the lawyer was present. Clark recounted a conversation she had with Cassie Ventura years ago in which Clark allegedly told Ventura she should end her romantic relationship with Combs. Ventura's response, Clark paraphrased to Combs' lawyers, "Jay-Z was taken. Who would she date?" And apparently Clark said that was true. So yes, these are all wonderful people who surround themselves with other wonderful people. So believe it or not, both Usher and Barack Obama's names have been dropped in the Diddy trial at this point. Apparently, his one-time personal assistant, David James, also says that Diddy took drugs every day, including sometimes downing Obama-shaped ecstasy pills. They make Obama-shaped ecstasy pills? Why? I don't understand. That's weird. Anyway. Apparently, Combs receives his drug haul from a dealer named One Stop, which, okay, good branding there. He's the one-stop shop. All right, fair enough. Again, this is the big question in all of this, is whether Combs was just engaging in routine rapper horrifying behavior, or kind of worse than normal for a rapper, which is saying an awful lot, or whether he was actually engaged in trafficking. Again, the indictment revolves around two females that Combs is alleged to have engaged in commercial acts as a result of force, fraud, and coercion. And then there was a superseding indictment that added a second count of trafficking against another victim. Combs is saying these both were my girlfriends. So I guess one of the females is Cassie Ventura. I will say I do not have tremendous sympathy for the idea that she was a trafficking victim. She does appear to have been there voluntarily. And yes, the fact that he was abusing the living hell out of her speaks to him being evil, but it doesn't mean that he was engaged in trafficking if she is, in fact, the person at issue in the trafficking charge. We'll have Megyn Kelly on to discuss all this because, frankly, Megyn watches this stuff a lot more closely than I do and has a greater level of expertise. Meanwhile, in other entertainment news, it is kind of amazing to watch elderly people who are now desperately attempting to maintain attention. Jennifer Lopez is 55 years old. Now, granted, she's an amazing-looking 55-year-old person, but the desperate need for attention by our celebrity class, like Jennifer Lopez, is worth a lot of money, like a lot of money. She is supposedly worth at least $400 million. You don't have to do this, Jennifer, just to be provocative. So she is now making out with her backup dancers. Now, I thought that this is a routine that's been around for a long time. Like, I'm old enough to remember when Madonna did this, like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So I'm not sure what the controversy here is. Everything is just old and played out, including J-Lo. So here she was at one of her shows, desperate for attention. Okay, so there she is making out with her backup dancers. And and multiple backup dancers. She's like kissing and making out with. So this is old and tired. Listen, Grandmama. She's 55 years old. I mean, come on. What are you doing at this point? I have to say, it is trashy and gross and stupid, obviously. But there is this thing that's happening in our culture where a bunch of people are masquerading as 17-year-olds who are actually middle-aged. It kind of is amazing. It really is kind of an amazing thing. Like, if you are of middle age, you should act like you are of middle age. I don't mean you have to be a fuddy-duddy. I do mean that you should act like an adult. Like, you're not a 17-year-old or a 21-year-old trying desperately to gain attention. You see this with Katy Perry also, right? Katy Perry is also making a fool of herself doing her international tours right now, being silly. And you see it in the lyrics of a Taylor Swift also, who pretends to be a lovelorn 16-year-old girl when, in fact, Taylor Swift is currently age 35. But you see it all over the place. I mean, truly. You see it in the manosphere, too. You see a bunch of people who are sort of in the podcast space who are cosplaying at being 17-year-old Beavis and Butthead types. I enjoy Theo Von as much as the next guy, although I think that his political takes are insanely stupid much of the time, because I just don't think that he focuses on that sort of stuff. And if you don't focus on it, he's not claiming to be an expert. That's fine. But if you're not claiming to be an expert, I'm not going to take your opinions on these matters particularly seriously. I mean, Theo Von's a comedian. That's fine. It's also worth noting Theo Von is 45 years old. Theo Von is 4 years older than I am. Theo Von is like, in the olden days, Theo Von would be closing in on the gold watch and retirement. And he dresses like a skater who's 16 years old, wears his hat backwards, and acts as though he's a refugee from the Stoners Club in junior high. It's a little weird. Again, he's very funny. I'm just wondering, and this is kind of the entire branding now. It's like there's a whole generation of people who are 40 and up who are acting as though they are 20 and under. And at some point, it's got to become a bit of, how do you do, fellow kids? Now, to be fair, I've been 80 since I was like 15. Right? I am a fuddy-duddy. I am a grumpy old man. I've always been a grumpy old man. I was a grumpy old man when I was a teenager. That said, there is something strange about a country that is rapidly aging, in which, because we are rapidly aging and we don't have enough kids, we have decided that adults are going to be the new kids. We're going to treat 40-year-olds as though they are 20 and 60-year-olds as though they are 30. It's a strange look. It's very, very weird. At a certain point, shouldn't you just become a responsible adult, able to make responsible decisions? Or are we just going to do this forever? Is everybody just going to turn into Madonna, twerking her way to glory with two artificial hips at the age of 92? That's just the question, I suppose. Alrighty, folks, the show is continuing for members right now. We're going to be jumping into the mailbag. This is why you should become a member. Your question might be next. If you're not a member, become a member, use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.